Welcome to our second video on digital diagnostics. In this video, we're going to be going over the general tricks for taking good photos of samples. And this will include information such as what to include in your photos, as well as what are some tips and tricks on getting a good photo that will make it easier for the identification process. So to start off, what are some good things to include in your photo sample submission? Well, we want to know the whole story. If you're submitting something about a plant, we want to know what's going on with your plant and give us context to the problem that you're seeing. So one of the first things is you need your subject. If it's a plant, include a picture of the plant. Or if it's an insect, picture of the insect, a fungi, etc. You want to include your subject and get it from multiple angles so that we can better help identify this. And context is really important here as well. We want to know the location of where your sample was found, because that might tell us something about what's going on with your plant. So for example, was it found in a pot? Was it in your gardening bed? Is it out in a field with a bunch of other plants? Or can you tell us, are there a lot of other plants affected nearby with similar symptoms or similar insect problems, etc.? So as much information as you can include with your photos, the better. And including size is really important because sometimes it may be hard to identify something without having a context to what size it is. And a really good thing to do is to include a ruler in your samples, in your photos, because this gives us an idea of what the size of whatever your specimen is. And if you don't have a ruler ready and handy, you can use something else, something common like a household item, such as a penny is a really good tool because people know the general size of a penny, and you can easily compare that to the specimen in your photo. In addition to this, including photos in color can also be really helpful. Using color for identification can be really important in some cases. And as I mentioned before, the more information you can include, the better. So this may mean taking multiple photos and then submitting multiple photos as your photo submission. If you're interested in getting a plant identified, there are some important things to include. So for example, you want to see the entire plant. So this may be a really far away picture to get the whole plant, especially if it's something a little bit bigger or if it's a tree or something like that. And you also, if possible, should get a picture of the stems with the leaves and a close-up of this. Sometimes the leaf margin, so the edge of the leaf, can be an important factor in identifying them. And another big thing is flowers and fruit. Some plants are really hard to identify without seeing their reproductive structures like the flowers or the fruit. So in the case of the example I have here, you see you have what looks kind of like a vining plant on a fence. And then you look at a close-up of the stem itself and the leaves, and I have a better idea of what this plant might be. But if you include a picture of the flower in here, I can almost immediately tell you this is a passiflora. It's a type of passion flower. So in this case, it was a lot easier to identify the plant using the flower. And so all of these can help in identifying the plant. So we have the context of the entire plant and where it's located. We know that it's climbing. It might be a vining type plant. And then we have the stems and the leaves to get a better idea for identification. And then the flower in where we can be certain, yes, that's what this is. So when you think you might have a potential plant pathogen on your plant that you're submitting for samples, there's some things you need to take pictures of. You want to get a picture of the entire plant, and this will give us an idea of what is the plant and what could potentially be a pathogen on this plant. And including neighboring plants in your picture can be important as well. For example, if you have a neighboring plant that's healthy, we have an idea of what a healthy plant should look like and what's happening with your not so healthy plant. Or if you have other plants of different species nearby that are also affected with similar symptoms, this might also give us context to what's going on with your plant. And then you also want to include the symptomology, and this could be anywhere on the plant. Is it in the leaves, roots, stems, fruits, or flowers? Or it could be on multiple parts of the plant. So for the example I have here, we have a nice background photo of our plants in the landscape, And you can see that there's some healthy plants in there and some affected plants. And we can tell from this photo, this is our elephant ear plants. So we have an idea of what kind of pathogens might be on elephant ear plants. Then we have a zoomed up picture of our symptomatic leaf. And on this, you can see the yellowing around a necrotic spot on the edge of the leaves. So this tells us a little bit about what our pathogen could potentially be. And then we also threw in another picture of the symptoms on the edge of the leaf a little bit closer up. And this can only help in the identification process. We also took a look at the stem and cut the stem open, did a cross section of it, and took a picture of, was there anything going on inside the stem? Because this could potentially have symptoms too. And in the case of this example, we didn't see anything going on, but we included it just in case. And then we also included a picture of our roots, and the roots seemed all right. The base of the roots that connects to the stem seemed pretty good. We don't see rotting, necrosis, or any obvious symptoms there. But again, we included it just for context. So the other thing about our picture in landscape is we noticed that it kind of looks like this might be under a tree. So this could give us some context. It rains a lot here in Florida. So maybe underneath the tree, it doesn't get as much sun, so it's a little bit wetter. And after a rain, it's not going to dry off as fast as if it was out in open sun. And this yellowing around this necrotic spot on the leaves, it tells me that this is probably bacterial. And for the case of management, this might be enough. We might just be able to tell from these pictures that you have a bacterial problem with your plant, and you can decide how to treat from there. And in some cases, you may be looking for something more specific. So what I know about elephant ears plants and in Florida is that when it rains a lot, they might get xanthomonas, which is a type of bacteria. And all of the symptoms here seem pretty consistent with xanthomonas. But like I said, all you might have needed to know was that it was bacterial. So your digital symptoms were good enough for that. So just think about that when you're submitting pictures. Submit as many as you can, because it might help build this story and help your diagnostician understand what's going on with your plants. So next we move on to insect samples, one of my favorites. So for an insect, one of the important things to include is where you found it. Was it found on a plant, or was it found inside a structure? And if it was on a plant or in a structure, was it causing any damage? And can you take photos of the damage to help with the context of where your insect was found? And also, taking pictures from multiple angles can be helpful. Sometimes there might be an identifying characteristic that's on the head that can only be seen when you're looking directly straight at the tip of the insect down the body plane. And similarly, there might be something that you can only really see from a dorsal view, looking directly at the back of the insect. And with insects, they have multiple life stages, and some of these might look different and some may be more distinct than others. So if you can, get pictures of the multiple life stages, especially if they're on the same plant. However, with insects, anything smaller than a ½ inch can be pretty difficult to photograph without using magnification. So if you can use magnification, this is a great tool when photographing your insects. And we'll talk a little bit more about some options that you have to take pictures of insects with magnification in one of our later segments. So the example I have here is out in a cabbage field. So that's what this context picture tells us. It looks like it's some kind of commercial or maybe backyard production of in-row cabbage. And you can see from the picture here on the left that the damage that is being caused is like this window painting, these holes inside the leaves of the cabbage. And then we have another photo here that includes what looks to be like a pupa of an insect. So to me, right off the bat, because I know this is cabbage and I'm a little bit familiar with this type of insect, I can say that this is the diamondback moth, Plutella xylostella, which is a major pest of crucifer crops. So in addition to identifying plants, plant pathogens, and insects, there could be other things that are going wrong with our plant. So for example, it may be a nematode problem, which is likely in the soil, Or it could potentially be something environmental, such as nutrients, the soil conditions themselves, watering, or something like that. And we may not be sure what our plant problem is or even have an idea. We just know that our plant isn't doing very well. It's looking sick and unhealthy. So the best thing to do in this scenario is to take as many pictures as you can. As I mentioned in some of these other examples, context is really, really important for helping your diagnostician figure out what's wrong with your plant. And taking a picture of the whole plant, again, is important to give us an idea of what we're working with. What about the plant is sick? What kind of symptoms are you seeing? So getting good pictures of all the different parts of the plants, including the roots, stems, leaves, fruiting bodies, what have you. And close-up of the damage that's on there is really important for helping us identify it as well. And if you happen to have an idea of maybe what the cause may be, or just found incidentally some insects or any other kind of organisms munching on your plants, you can also include pictures of that to, again, give us context of what's going on with your plant. So in the example I have here, it's a basil plant that our context photo shows us that it's in a pretty small pot, and it's a pretty tall and big plant we have here. And you can see from our other context clues, we have a bike in the background of this picture, which kind of gives us an indication of the size of the plant. And then we have a close-up of some of the symptoms that we're seeing, and we notice that it's kind of on the bottom of the plant, and the top leaves of the plant, as in our context photo, look pretty healthy and green. Then we have a close-up of the leaf itself with the symptomology. You see this yellowing, and the veins seem to look all right, but between the veins, there's this yellowing chlorosis. So our context photo kind of tells us enough in this situation. We have a pretty small pot for a pretty big plant. And who knows how long the plant has been in this pot. It's very likely that this is somehow related to a nutritional problems or the roots being too bound in that pot and needing more space to grow to support such a big and healthy plant. So in this case, we didn't need pictures of the roots to tell us that the pot was probably causing the problem, and it is related to some kind of environmental factor. But in some cases, we may need to look at more to understand better what is going on. So like I said before, the more pictures you can include and the more context you can provide can be very beneficial in the diagnostics process. So many of the issues with photos for identification are the same, and there's common tricks and tips that we can give you to try to avoid making these mistakes when sending photos to a diagnostician. Sometimes the image may be too dark, such as the photo on the top right here, or it might be too bright or overexposed, such as the photo below that one. Or it might be that your specimen is a little too far away to really see what's going on. Or it might be too close. It's too close that the camera can't focus on what's there. Or, especially if your specimen is moving, your picture might be too blurry to understand what's going on. So the two pictures to the left, for example, are both out of focus, where the focus is on something else in the photo, so you can't really see the insect. And also, the diagnostic characteristic just might not be present in the photo that you've provided. So, as we mentioned before, taking multiple pictures can help with this. But now we're going to go into some tips and tricks to how to avoid making these mistakes when you're about to take photos. So as I've mentioned already, getting a good photo may require taking multiple photos. So here's an example I just wanted to share with you guys here. I took probably 7 or 8 photos before I was able to get a good enough shot to be able to think, maybe I could identify it from this picture. And sometimes it may even require more pictures than that, because on this case, the specimen was moving, so it was hard to get a good picture. So in this example, from the 4 pictures that I have here, I got a couple different angles and a good body shot where I was able to identify that this was a halictid bee of some kind. So as I alluded to in our last slide, multiple pictures may allow you to get a different angle of your specimen. And this can be pretty important as it may not be visible from the picture you have. So taking multiple different angles may get a better idea of what your specimen is. This is really important in the case of insects. So for example, if you have a dorsal shot, you may not be able to see the identifying characteristic that's on the ventral side. So in this example, I have a couple pictures of a wasp from different angles. And from this, I'm able to identify it as a cicada killer, which is a type of specid wasp. So another trick is to play around with your distance and magnification of the photo for better identifying characteristics. So for example, if you take a picture from far away, you may not be able to see all the details you need, though this may provide some context clues as to where your plant or specimen is. But if you take a closer up picture, you may be able to see what you need to identify the specimen. So for example, I have a picture here on the left that is a faraway picture of a plant. And I can't really tell what's going on in this picture. I can maybe have a few guesses, but if we get a more close-up picture, like the picture on the right, I can really tell that this is a type of mimosa vine. And the same is true for magnification. So if you have the ability to use different magnifications, such as hand lenses or attachments for your phone, a microscope or something like this can only help in the identification process to be able to get good, clear pictures of different characteristics on your specimen. And you can also use the zoom function to play around with magnification if you're using a cell phone or a point and shoot camera. Well, with this, you have to be cautious not to zoom too far because you may get a grainy appearance in your photo. So it may take a little bit of playing around with to understand what's the best distance, and it's different for every specimen. So just keep this in mind when you're taking your photos. Choosing your background can also be important in getting a good picture of your specimen as well. So for example here, if you have a dark colored insect on a light background, you're not going to be able to see the characteristics. You can see on the photo on the top left that we have the same specimen on a white background, and you can hardly see the different colorations and curvatures of the insect specimen. But on the right, you have an insect on the same insect on a black background, which allows those colors to really pop and those different characteristics to turn out really well on the black background. And reducing the noise of your background can be important as well. And what I mean by noise is how busy, what's going on, is there a pattern in the background? Because sometimes this can make the focus not quite right in your image. So the bottom photo here is the same image or the same insect with two different backgrounds. One is a black background that has a texture to it, and the other is a black background that lacks the texture. And you can see the insect characteristics a lot more clearly on the insect with no texture, and it's just a flat black background. So the last thing I'm going to touch on in this video is how to use lighting to get a good photo. So lighting can be really important in being able to see the diagnostic characteristics we want to see in a photo. So for example, this picture here is a picture of a fly that was taken from the same distance using the same background, but we manipulated the light to get a better view of the specimen in our photo. And you can see, depending on where the light was coming from or what type of light we used, we get a better sample of our specimen by photo. And this can be easy to do at home. You don't have to have anything fancy to be able to manipulate the light. It could be as simple as going into a different room or going into a room with a window with better sunlight to take your photo, or moving around when you're outside. Or if you have a flashlight or a lamp or anything like that, it may be easy to direct which direction your light is coming from with this, which can change the quality of your picture. Another thing to consider is if you are outside, a bright sunny day actually doesn't take as good of pictures as it would on a cloudy day. And there's a lot of examples of this. And in addition to this, if you're taking photos, you can manipulate the light yourself using shadows casted by a piece of paper or a hat or anything like that. And it's really easy to manipulate the light, but sometimes it takes some planning and some playing around with to get the photo that you want. So we've covered quite a bit in this video, from what types of photos to take of different types of specimens we're looking at, to different tips and tricks on how to get a good photo of the specimen you want to identify. So up next, we're going to talk about how to take good photos with your smartphone. And interestingly enough, most of the pictures in this presentation were taken on a smartphone. So it can be as simple as using the phone that you have in your pocket to take good pictures that experts are able to use to diagnose your plant problems.